Objectivity is a fundamental ethical principle that enables internal auditors to perform engagements with impartiality and professional judgment. Candidates must be able to assess whether an individual internal auditor has impairments to objectivity and understand how such impairments affect audit quality and stakeholder confidence. The program specifically emphasizes evaluating the impact of self-review bias, familiarity bias, and conflicts of interest. These threats may compromise an auditor's ability to provide independent and reliable conclusions. Recognizing potential impairments is essential because even the appearance of bias can reduce confidence in audit results. Internal auditors must identify, disclose, and mitigate objectivity threats to preserve the credibility and effectiveness of the internal audit function. 1. Understanding objectivity in internal auditing. Objectivity refers to an internal auditor's ability to perform professional responsibilities without allowing bias, conflicts of interest, or undue influence to affect judgment. While independence is primarily an organizational concept, objectivity is an individual characteristic that must be maintained throughout every engagement. Objective auditors evaluate evidence fairly, communicate findings honestly, and base conclusions solely on facts and professional standards. Objectivity allows stakeholders to trust audit conclusions and rely on recommendations for decision-making. Threats to objectivity may arise from personal relationships, prior responsibilities, financial interests, organizational pressures, or emotional attachments. Internal auditors must continuously assess their circumstances and behaviors to identify potential impairments. Maintaining objectivity ensures that audit activities contribute effectively to governance, risk management, and internal control processes. 2. Self-review bias and its impact. Self-review bias occurs when internal auditors evaluate work for which they were previously responsible or in which they played a significant role. This situation creates a risk that auditors may be reluctant to identify weaknesses in processes, decisions, or controls they help design, implement, or manage. For example, an auditor who previously supervised an operational department may struggle to objectively assess that department shortly after joining internal audit. Similarly, auditors who participated in developing a control framework may find it difficult to critically evaluate its effectiveness. Self-review bias threatens the credibility of audit conclusions because personal involvement can influence professional judgment. Organizations typically mitigate this risk through auditor reassignment, independent review procedures, or delaying audit responsibilities until sufficient separation exists. 3. Familiarity bias and its impact. Familiarity bias arises when auditors develop close relationships with individuals, departments, or activities they are responsible for auditing. Long-term interactions may lead auditors to become overly trusting, less skeptical, or reluctant to challenge management assertions. Familiarity bias can occur when auditors repeatedly audit the same area, have strong personal friendships with employees, or previously worked within the audited function. As familiarity increases, professional skepticism may decline, reducing the likelihood that risks, control weaknesses, or compliance issues are identified and reported appropriately. Even when no actual bias exists, stakeholders may perceive the auditor's judgment as compromised. Organizations often address familiarity bias through engagement rotation, supervisory reviews, periodic reassignment, and ongoing monitoring of auditor independence and objectivity. 4. Conflicts of interest in internal auditing. Conflicts of interest occur when personal, financial, professional, or family interests have the potential to influence an auditor's judgment or create the appearance of bias. These situations may involve ownership of investments in an audited entity, relationships with vendors, employment opportunities, family members working within audited departments, or personal involvement in organizational initiatives. Conflicts of interest do not necessarily result in unethical behavior, but they create conditions where objectivity may reasonably be questioned. Internal auditors are expected to disclose actual, potential, and perceived conflicts promptly to appropriate parties. Failure to disclose conflicts can damage professional credibility and reduce stakeholder confidence in audit findings. Effective management of conflicts is therefore critical to maintaining objectivity and professional integrity. 5. Assessing and mitigating objectivity impairments. Internal auditors and audit leaders must actively assess potential objectivity impairments before and during engagements. Assessment involves evaluating relationships, prior responsibilities, financial interests, personal biases, and organizational circumstances that may influence judgment. When impairments are identified, appropriate safeguards should be implemented. Common safeguards include reassigning auditors, rotating engagement responsibilities, obtaining independent reviews, increasing supervisory oversight, or disclosing the impairment to management and the board. In some cases, external resources may be used to perform or supervise audit work. The Chief Audit Executive is responsible for establishing policies and procedures that help identify and manage objectivity threats throughout the audit process. Effective safeguards preserve audit credibility while ensuring that engagements continue to provide reliable and unbiased assurance. 6. Objectivity Threat Assessment Framework. For examination purposes, candidates should apply the SFCD model for assessing objectivity impairments: self-review bias, familiarity bias, conflicts of interest, and disclosure. Self-review occurs when auditors assess their own prior work. Familiarity arises from close relationships or prolonged exposure to audited activities. Conflicts of interest involve personal interests that may affect judgment. Disclosure serves as a critical safeguard that enables appropriate mitigation and oversight. A useful exam principle is that objectivity can be impaired by both actual bias and the appearance of bias. Therefore, auditors must evaluate not only whether they remain objective, but also whether reasonable stakeholders may perceive a lack of objectivity. Applying the SFCD framework helps preserve professional credibility and audit effectiveness.